Dr. Elena Vasquez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she climbed down into the dig site. The hot sun of Kepler 442c beat down on the excavation team, but Elena barely noticed. After 3 months of careful digging, they had finally broken through into something amazing. The research ship Prometheus hung in orbit above them, its crew waiting for updates. Elena led the xenoarchaeology team, and this was the biggest discovery of her career. What they had found buried beneath the red sand was not just another dead city. It was something much more important. Dr. Vasquez, you need to see this, called out Marcus Chin, her lead technician. He stood at the entrance to what looked like a massive underground complex. The walls were smooth and black, made from some kind of metal that still gleamed after thousands of years. Elena hurried over to where Marcus stood. Behind him, the other team members were setting up lights and scanning equipment. The tunnel stretched down into darkness, wider than any building they had seen on this planet. The scanner readings are incredible, Marcus said, checking his tablet. This complex goes down at least 2 kilometers. The power signatures suggest some systems are still active down there. Elena felt her heart racing. Active technology from an ancient civilization was every archaeologist's dream. Are we sure it's safe? Atmospheric readings are normal. No harmful radiation or gases. Whatever built this, they knew how to make things last. The team spent the next 4 hours carefully making their way deeper into the complex. Emergency lights flickered on as they walked, triggered by motion sensors that still worked after countless years. The corridors were enormous, clearly built for beings much larger than humans. As they descended, Elena noticed something strange about the walls. They were covered in symbols and markings from dozens of different languages. She recognized some of them from other dig sites across the galaxy. This place had been used by many different species. Dr. Vasquez, called out Sarah Kim, their data specialist. I'm picking up massive storage devices ahead. This looks like some kind of archive or library. They entered a vast chamber filled with crystalline structures that hummed with energy. The crystals were arranged in perfect rows, each one glowing softly with blue light. In the center of the room stood a control platform with interfaces designed for multiple species. Elena approached the platform carefully. Can we access their systems? Sarah ran her scanner over the controls. The interface is responding to our presence. It's adapting the display to human language patterns. This is incredibly advanced technology. The main screen flickered to life, showing text in perfect English. Elena read the welcome message with growing excitement. Galactic Confederation Archive, Central Repository. Welcome visitors from Sol System. Your species designation, human. Access level, restricted observer. Elena's breath caught in her throat. It knows we're human. It knows about Earth. Marcus moved closer to the screen. Look at the date stamp. This archive was last updated over 800 years ago, back when humans had barely reached their own moon. Sarah worked at the secondary controls, her fingers flying over the interface. I'm accessing the species database. This is amazing, Dr. Vasquez. There are records here for thousands of different civilizations. Elena watched as Sarah pulled up file after file. Each one contained detailed information about different alien species, their biology, technology, culture, and history. The database seemed to contain everything about every spacefaring race in their section of the galaxy. Wait, Sarah said, frowning at her screen. Something's wrong here. What do you mean? Look at the timeline. According to these records, there was a major galactic civilization called the Confederation that lasted for over 50,000 years. But then, about 800 years ago, almost all activity just stops. The records end abruptly. Elena studied the data streaming across the screens. What happened to them? That's the strange part. There are references to some kind of catastrophic event, but most of the specific records have been deleted or corrupted. I keep seeing mentions of something called the Great Fury and warnings about the sleeping giants of Sol. Marcus looked up from another terminal. Dr. Vasquez, I found something else odd. Look at this species listing. Elena walked over to see what Marcus had discovered. The screen showed a database query result with hundreds of species names, but there were gaps in the alphabetical listing. Several entries appeared to have been deliberately removed. See these missing entries? The database structure shows there should be records here, but they've been deleted. Not corrupted or lost, actively removed, Sarah called out from across the room. I found more references to the missing data. There are files here that mention the unnamed ones and the forgotten. Whatever species this was, someone really didn't want them remembered. Elena felt a chill despite the warm air in the chamber. Pull up everything you can find about humans. I want to know what this Confederation knew about us. The human files were surprisingly detailed. The Confederation had been watching Earth for thousands of years, documenting humanity's development from primitive tribes to their first steps into space. But the records became fragmented around the time humans developed faster-than-light travel. "There's something here about first contact protocols," Sarah reported. "It looks like the Confederation was planning to make contact with humanity once we reached a certain technological level." "But they never did," Marcus observed. "According to our history, we never encountered any galactic civilization when we first went to the stars." Elena studied the timeline carefully. The Confederation records end right around the time humans started exploring beyond their solar system. That can't be a coincidence. As the team continued exploring the database, they found more disturbing clues, references to containment protocols for humanity, discussions about whether humans were suitable for integration into galactic society. Most troubling of all were the repeated warnings about human aggressive tendencies and the need for careful management. "Dr. Vasquez," Sarah called softly, "I think I found something important. There's a sealed archive section that requires higher access clearance, but the system is asking if we want to view final testimony records about something called the Last War." Elena looked around at her team. They were all scientists, dedicated to uncovering the truth about ancient civilizations. But she had a feeling that whatever they were about to discover would change everything they thought they knew about humanity's place in the galaxy. "Grant access," she said quietly. The screen flashed a warning message. "The following records contain testimony from the final survivors of the Galactic Confederation. Content may be disturbing. These records detail the extinction of a species whose name has been removed from all databases by unanimous consent of surviving civilizations." Elena felt her mouth go dry. An entire species had been wiped out so completely that even their name was forgotten. And somehow, it was connected to humanity's entry into galactic space. "Continue," she whispered. The screen flickered and began loading files that had been sealed for 8 centuries. Elena realized they were about to learn a terrible truth about humanity's past, one that someone had tried very hard to bury forever. The sealed files opened slowly, as if the ancient computer system was reluctant to share its secrets. Elena and her team gathered around the main display as holographic projectors came to life throughout the chamber. Suddenly, they were surrounded by ghostly figures, 3-dimensional recordings of beings unlike anything they had ever seen. The first figure was tall and crystalline, its body made of what looked like living glass. When it moved, light refracted through its form, creating beautiful rainbow patterns. When it spoke, its voice was like wind chimes mixed with the sound of breaking crystal. "I am Zethara, High Counselor of the Zelthani Dominion and final speaker for the Galactic Confederation," the being said. "If you are seeing this recording, it means our civilization is gone. We record this testimony so that future species might understand what happened to us and why our name must never be spoken again." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The missing species finally had a name: the Zelthani. The hologram continued. "We were the eldest race in this sector of the galaxy. For over 50,000 years, we guided younger species toward enlightenment and peace. We believed ourselves to be the perfect form of life, beings of pure crystal and energy, untainted by the messy biological needs that plagued other species." Marcus whispered, "They're talking about themselves in past tense. This recording was made while they were still alive." Another Zelthani appeared in the hologram, this one smaller and dimmer than the first. "I am Kethmon, Chief Scientific Advisor. I must record what we learned about the humans, though it shames us to admit our mistakes." Elena leaned forward as the second Zelthani began its testimony. "When we first discovered the humans of Sol, we were fascinated. They had developed space, travel remarkably quickly, but they were still primitive compared to Confederation standards. They were violent, chaotic, and unpredictable. We decided they needed guidance." The hologram showed star charts and images of early human space colonies. Elena recognized some of them from history books: the first Mars settlements, the Jupiter mining stations, the research outposts around Saturn. "We approached them carefully," Kethmon continued. "Not with open contact, but through subtle influence. We redirected some asteroids toward their mining operations, making it appear like natural disasters. We introduced computer viruses that would shut down their life support systems. We wanted them to realize they needed help." Elena felt sick to her stomach. The Zelthani were describing deliberate attacks on human settlements. "Each time disaster struck," the hologram explained, "we would arrive shortly afterward with offers of technological assistance. We provided them with improved shield generators, better life support systems, more efficient engines. They were so grateful for our help." Sarah looked horrified. They were causing disasters just so they could swoop in and play savior. The first Zelthani, Zethara, returned to the recording. We told ourselves we were helping them. The humans were learning to depend on our technology, our guidance. We were slowly bringing them into the Confederation's sphere of influence. Everything was going according to plan. The hologram changed to show more recent star charts. Elena could see the human expansion into space over several decades, with Zelthani ships carefully hidden just outside sensor range. But the humans were not like other species we had guided, Zethara admitted. They were suspicious. They asked too many questions. Some of their scientists began to notice patterns in the disasters that struck their colonies. A new Zelthani appeared, this one cracked and dim, clearly damaged. I am Vothek, former military coordinator. I must confess our greatest error. Elena noticed that this Zelthani looked different from the others. Its crystalline structure was fractured, with dark lines running through its body like scars. The humans established a deep space monitoring station at the edge of their solar system, Vothek explained. It was hidden, equipped with advanced sensors they had developed themselves. We did not know about it when we planned our final demonstration. The hologram showed detailed images of a massive space station orbiting Mars. Elena recognized it immediately. The Mars Research Colony, one of humanity's most ambitious early projects. We decided the humans needed a larger lesson, Vothek continued, his voice becoming quieter. The Mars colony was becoming too independent, too confident. They were developing technologies we had not given them. This could not be allowed. Elena felt her blood turn cold as she realized what the Zelthani was about to describe. We arranged for a cascade failure in their atmospheric processors. It would look like an accident, a tragic malfunction that would kill everyone on the station. Then we would arrive to help the survivors and offer to rebuild with safer Zelthani technology. The hologram showed the final moments of the Mars Research Colony. Elena watched in horror as 50,000 humans died in what history had recorded as humanity's worst space disaster. But there were no survivors, Vothek whispered. The failure was more complete than we intended. Every human on the station died, including their children. We had never intended for the young ones to perish. Sarah was crying now, watching the recordings of families desperately trying to escape the failing station. They murdered 50,000 people just to prove a point. We thought the humans would react as other species had, Zethara said, returning to the recording. They would mourn. They would accept our help, and they would become more dependent on our guidance. We did not expect them to discover the truth. The hologram changed to show the hidden monitoring station that the Zelthani had missed. Elena watched as human technicians played back intercepted communications, Zelthani voices celebrating the successful destruction of the Mars colony. The humans had been listening to us for months, Kethmon explained. They had learned our language, broken our communication codes. They heard us planning the attack. They heard us laughing about the deaths of their people. Elena felt her hands clench into fists as she watched the recorded reactions of the humans who discovered the truth. Their grief turned to rage in a way that was terrible to witness. What happened next was beyond our understanding, Zethara said, his voice full of regret. Other species had accepted tragedy as part of life. The humans did not. They became something we had never seen before. The hologram showed human space in the months following the discovery. Elena watched in amazement as every human colony, every ship, every space station mobilized with a single purpose. They united, Vothek said, his damaged voice filled with fear, even in the recording. Every human nation, every corporation, every settlement contributed to what they called the war machine. In 18 standard months, they transformed their entire civilization into something designed for one purpose: our destruction. Elena stared at the images of human shipyards working around the clock, of entire planets being strip-mined for raw materials, of research facilities developing new weapons and technologies at impossible speeds. We tried to negotiate, Zethara pleaded to the recording device. We offered them technology, resources, entire star systems. We offered to make them equal partners in the Confederation, but they would not listen. The final part of the testimony showed the first battle between human and Zelthani forces. Elena watched as human ships, using technologies they had developed in mere months, tore through Zelthani defenses that had protected the galaxy for millennia. They learned too fast, Kethmon whispered. They took our weapons and made them better. They found weaknesses in our shields that we never knew existed. They fought with a fury that terrified every species in the Confederation. Elena realized she was witnessing the beginning of humanity's first and only galactic war. And it was clear from the Zelthani testimony that the humans were winning. The holographic testimony continued, but now the recordings showed more than just words. Battle logs, surveillance data, and intercepted human communications filled the chamber around Elena and her team. They were watching humanity's transformation, from a struggling spacefaring species into something that made the ancient Galactic Confederation tremble with fear. The humans called it the Great Awakening, Zethara explained, his crystalline form flickering as the damaged recording struggled to maintain clarity. But we in the Confederation came to know it by a different name, the War of Absolute Fury. Elena watched as the holographic displays showed human space in the weeks following the discovery of Zelthani involvement in the Mars colony disaster. Every human world was mobilizing, but not in the chaotic way the Zelthani had expected. The organization was terrifying in its efficiency. "Show them the communication intercepts," Vothek commanded, his fractured form barely maintaining cohesion. "Show them how quickly they united." New recordings appeared, actual human voices from 800 years ago. Elena listened as the leaders of different Earth nations held emergency sessions, their anger cold and focused. Every military asset, every research facility, every manufacturing plant, one human leader said in the recording. "We're not just going to war. We're becoming war." Sarah pointed at the tactical displays surrounding them. "Look at how fast they converted their infrastructure. Civilian shipyards became military production centers in days, not months." The Zelthani recordings showed their growing alarm as reports came in from across human space. Mining operations that had been extracting resources for trade suddenly shifted to military production. Scientific research stations that had been studying peaceful applications of technology began developing weapons at an unprecedented pace. "We thought we understood human nature," Kathman admitted in his testimony. "We had observed them for centuries. We knew they were violent, but we believed that violence was chaotic and emotional. We never realized it could be focused with such precision." Elena watched in fascination as the recordings showed human engineers reverse engineering Zelthani technology. What should have taken decades of careful study was accomplished in weeks. The humans didn't just copy the alien designs, they improved them. "They made our weapons better than we could," Vothek said, his voice filled with disbelief even in the recording. "Our shield generators that had protected ships for millennia. They found ways to overload them in minutes. Our energy weapons that could crack planets. They built versions that could do it faster and from longer range." The holographic display showed the first major engagement between human and Zelthani forces. Elena held her breath as she watched. Human ships, still bearing civilian markings because there hadn't been time to repaint them, tear through a Zelthani patrol fleet. The battle lasted 17 minutes, the recording noted. The entire Zelthani fleet was destroyed. The humans captured 3 ships intact for study, then continued their advance without slowing down. Marcus shook his head in amazement. "They weren't just fighting, they were learning from every battle. That's what made them so terrifying," Zethara confirmed. "Every encounter made them stronger. They adapted to our tactics faster than we could develop new ones. Within 6 months, they were using strategies we had never seen before." Elena studied the tactical analyses that accompanied the testimony. The human approach to warfare was unlike anything in the Confederation's records. They didn't follow traditional military doctrine. Instead, they combined aggression with innovation in ways that confused their enemies. "The humans began targeting our support infrastructure," Vothek explained. "Not just our military bases, but our communication networks, our supply lines, our civilian research facilities. They understood that our empire was built on coordination between species. They attacked that coordination." The recordings showed human strike teams conducting precise raids deep in Confederation space. They would appear without warning, destroy key installations, and vanish before reinforcements could arrive. Each attack was calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimal human losses. "We tried to rally the other Confederation species," Zethara said, "but many of them were paralyzed by fear. They had never seen anything like human warfare. Some species began surrendering their territories to the humans before they were even attacked." Elena watched as entire star systems simply declared neutrality rather than face human forces. The Confederation, which had maintained order for 50,000 years, was falling apart in less than a year. The humans sent messages to every species in the Confederation, Kathman reported. "The same message in every language: we have no quarrel with you. Stand aside." Sarah read the translated message displayed on the screens around them. Most of the text is standard diplomatic language, but look at the ending. Elena read the final lines of the human message. "We seek only the Zelthani. Do not make their crimes your own. We will remember who helps them." It was a brilliant strategy, Vothek admitted. They isolated us from our allies without firing a shot. Species that had been part of the Confederation for thousands of years chose to abandon us rather than face human anger. The recordings showed the systematic destruction of Zelthani military assets across the galaxy. Human forces moved with clockwork precision, always knowing exactly where to strike for maximum effect. It was clear they had intelligence sources throughout Confederation space. Some of our own people began defecting, Zethara confessed, his form dimming with shame. Zelthani scientists and military officers who believed the humans would show mercy to those who helped them. They were wrong. Elena watched as the recordings showed captured Zelthani bases and ships. The humans had indeed accepted defectors, but not in the way the Zelthani expected. The defectors were interrogated thoroughly, their knowledge extracted, and then they were held as prisoners of war. The humans showed no mercy, but they also showed no unnecessary cruelty, Kethmon observed. They killed only when required for military objectives. They did not torture prisoners or attack civilian populations that had not supported us. But they never forgot, and they never forgave. The holographic displays showed the human advance toward the core Confederation worlds. Their fleet had grown, from a desperate collection of converted civilian ships to a military machine that spanned multiple star systems. Every victory brought them more captured technology, more resources, and more momentum. We began receiving communications from our outlying colonies, Vothek reported. The humans were not occupying conquered territory. They would destroy all military installations, confiscate all advanced technology, and then leave. They wanted nothing from us except our complete defeat. Elena realized the true scope of human strategy. They weren't trying to build an empire or gain resources. They were conducting a war of extermination with the focused precision of a surgeon removing a cancer. The final phase began when they reached our core systems, Zethara said, his voice becoming quieter. By then, we knew there would be no negotiation, no surrender that would satisfy them. They had moved beyond anger into something colder and more terrible. The recordings showed human fleets gathering at the edge of Zelthani space. Thousands of ships, built with a combination of human innovation and captured alien technology. Elena could see that humanity had transformed itself into something the galaxy had never seen before, a species entirely devoted to war. They sent us one final message before the last battle, Kethmon said. Only 3 words, but they carried the weight of absolute judgment. The display showed the human message, transmitted on every frequency to every Zelthani world. You killed children. Elena felt tears in her eyes as she realized the true source of human fury. It wasn't just about the Mars colony disaster. It was about the fact that the Zelthani had killed innocent families and then celebrated their deaths. Humanity had awakened to find that their children had been murdered by beings who saw it as a game. That was when we knew we would not survive this war, Zethara whispered. Because they were not fighting for territory or resources or power. They were fighting for justice, and their definition of justice was our complete extinction. The holographic testimony reached its climax as the final battle recordings began to play. Elena and her team found themselves surrounded by images of humanity's ultimate confrontation with the Zelthani at their homeworld of Zeth Prime. What they witnessed was not just a military victory, but the systematic erasure of an entire civilization. The siege of Zeth Prime lasted exactly 73 days, Zethara recorded, his crystalline form now so damaged that parts of him were simply missing from the hologram. The humans surrounded our homeworld with a fleet larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Elena stared at the tactical displays showing the human armada. Thousands of ships arranged in perfect formations, each one a masterpiece of combined human and alien technology. But what struck her most was their restraint. They could have destroyed the planet in hours, but they waited. They sent negotiators from every surviving Confederation species, Kethmon explained, his voice barely audible through the damaged recording. The Andromedans, the Spheroid Collective, the hive minds of Kepler, all of them begged the humans to accept our surrender. The recording showed the desperate diplomatic meetings that took place during the siege. Elena watched as ambassadors from dozens of species offered the humans everything they could imagine, technology that could reshape reality, resources from entire star systems, even the promise to police the galaxy forever against species like the Zelthani. The human response was always the same, Vothek added, his fractured form flickering like a dying candle. They would listen politely to every offer, thank the ambassadors for their concern, and then ask a single question. Will this bring back the children who died at Mars? Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she watched recording after recording of the same scene. Human diplomats, their faces carved from stone, rejecting every plea for mercy with quiet dignity. When the answer was inevitably no, Zethara continued, the humans would say, "Then we will continue." And they did. Elena observed the human siege tactics with growing understanding. They weren't just trying to conquer Zeth Prime, they were conducting a demonstration for the entire galaxy. Every day of the siege was broadcast across Confederation space, showing the futility of resisting human determination. On day 37, we attempted a breakout, Vothek recorded. Every ship we had left, every weapon we could deploy, we threw everything at one section of their blockade, hoping to punch through, and escape to our colonies in other systems. The battle recordings were devastating to watch. The Zelthani fleet, despite using their most advanced weapons and tactics, was systematically destroyed. Human ships moved with perfect coordination, their crews having learned to fight as a single organism dedicated to war. They destroyed 93% of our fleet in 4 hours, Vothek admitted. But they allowed the remaining ships to return to Zeth Prime. They wanted us to report how hopeless resistance had become. Elena realized the psychological warfare involved. The humans could have destroyed the entire Zelthani fleet, but they chose to let some survive to spread fear and despair among the defenders. On day 51, they began the demonstration, Kethmon whispered, his voice full of terror even in the recording. New holographic displays showed the human fleet conducting precise strikes on Zelthani installations across the galaxy. Not just military targets, but research facilities, cultural centers, historical archives, everything that made the Zelthani civilization unique. They had spent months cataloging every aspect of our species, Zethara explained. Every scientific achievement, every piece of art, every philosophical text. They systematically located and destroyed all of it, not out of rage, but with the cold precision of archaeologists excavating a site. Elena watched in horrified fascination as human forces conducted what could only be described as cultural extinction. They weren't just killing Zelthani, they were erasing them from history. We offered to surrender unconditionally, Kethmon recorded. We transmitted our capitulation on every frequency, in every language. We begged them to spare our colonies, our civilians, our children. The human response to the surrender offer was played in full. Elena listened as a human admiral speaking in perfectly calm tones, delivered humanity's final judgment. The Galactic Confederation will note that the species known as the Zelthani has offered surrender, the human said. We acknowledge this offer and formally reject it. There are crimes that cannot be forgiven. There are actions that cannot be undone. There are species that cannot be allowed to continue existing. Sarah gasped at the coldness in the human voice. They're not angry anymore. This is just execution. That was when we understood the true horror of what we faced, Zethara said. They were no longer fighting in fury. They had moved beyond emotion into something far more terrifying, absolute moral certainty. The recordings showed the final assault on Zeth Prime. Human forces descended on the planet with overwhelming power, but even then they maintained their precision. Civilian areas were evacuated before military strikes. Non-combatants were given opportunities to surrender and relocate. They gave every Zelthani civilian the chance to renounce their species and join other Confederation races, Vothek explained. Thousands accepted. The humans kept detailed records, ensuring that no former Zelthani could hide their origins, but also guaranteeing they would be protected in their new lives. Elena realized the sophistication of human justice. Even in their ultimate vengeance, they distinguished between the guilty and the innocent, between those who had supported the crimes and those who had simply been born into the wrong species. The last military installation fell on day 71, Kethmon recorded. The humans had captured every piece of Zelthani technology, every database, every historical record. They spent 2 full days reviewing everything, cataloging our entire civilization. And then they made their final decision, Zethara concluded, his holographic form now barely visible. Elena watched as human forces began the systematic destruction of everything Zelthani. Not the mindless vandalism of conquerors, but the careful, methodical work of those determined to ensure that nothing would remain. They destroyed our cities, but they preserved detailed recordings for historical archives, Vothek noted. They eliminated our technology, but they kept samples for scientific study. They were not acting in hate. They were conducting an execution with the precision of a court of law. The final scenes showed human forces preparing to leave Zeth Prime. The planet was intact, its ecosystem undamaged, ready for colonization by other species. But everything that had made it a Zelthani world was gone. Before they departed, the human commander sent a message to all surviving Confederation species. Zethara said. It was not a threat or a boast. It was a promise. Elena read the message as it appeared on the holographic displays. The species that called themselves the Zelthani have been judged and found wanting. Their name will be forgotten, their achievements erased, their existence denied. Let this serve as a reminder to all who would harm the innocent. We are patient, we are thorough, and we never forget. We return now to our homes. Leave us in peace, and you will live in peace. Threaten our people again, and this mercy will not be repeated. They left our space that day, Kethek whispered. All of them. Every human ship, every human soldier. They returned to their own systems and sealed their borders. The galaxy has not seen them since. Elena stared at the final holographic displays, showing human space surrounded by automated monitoring stations. 8 centuries later, those barriers still stood, watching, waiting, ensuring that humanity remained undisturbed. We survivors made a pact, Zethara concluded, his form fading to almost nothing. The Zelthani name would never be spoken again. Their crimes would be remembered only as a warning. The galaxy learned that day that some species are too dangerous to anger, and humanity is the most dangerous of all. Not because they are violent, but because when they choose violence, they are absolutely unstoppable. The holographic testimony ended, leaving Elena and her team alone in the silent chamber. They had witnessed the complete destruction of a galactic civilization, carried out with such precision and restraint that it was somehow more terrifying than any act of rage could have been. Elena looked around at her team, seeing her own thoughts reflected in their faces. They had discovered why the galaxy respected humanity's isolation, why no species had ever again attempted to manipulate or control human development. They had learned that humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their numbers, but their capacity for moral judgment combined with absolute determination to see justice done. Elena and her team sat in stunned silence as the last holographic testimony faded away. The crystal archive chamber returned to its soft blue glow, but the weight of what they had learned seemed to press down on them like a physical force. They had uncovered the truth about humanity's first and only galactic war. But the story was far from over. Sarah was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. There are more files here. Post-war records from the surviving Confederation species. Elena nodded slowly. Show us what happened after the humans left. New holograms appeared, but these were different from the Zelthani testimony. These recordings came from the species that had survived humanity's judgment, the Andromedans, the Spheroid Collective, the Crystalline Vorthan, and dozens of others. Their testimonies painted a picture of a galaxy forever changed by what they had witnessed. The first recording was from an Andromedan diplomat named Kessathira, her flowing tentacles rippling with nervous energy even in the 800-year-old hologram. In the aftermath of the human withdrawal, the Galactic Confederation ceased to exist, she reported. Not because it was destroyed, but because none of the surviving species were willing to risk attracting human attention again. We disbanded voluntarily within 1 standard year. Elena watched as the hologram showed star charts depicting the rapid dissolution of galactic government. Species that had cooperated for millennia suddenly became isolationist, each group retreating to their own territories and avoiding large-scale alliances. The humans had proven that galactic civilization itself was vulnerable, Kessathira continued. No matter how advanced we thought we were, no matter how stable our governments or how powerful our technologies, a sufficiently motivated species could destroy it all. We learned to fear not human aggression, but human attention. Marcus pulled up additional files showing the establishment of the monitoring networks that still surrounded human space. Look at this. Every major species contributed resources to maintain watch stations around human territory. We needed to know if they were expanding again, explained a Vorthan crystalline being in another recording. Not because we feared invasion, but because we needed advance warning if something had made them angry again. The idea of humans mobilizing for war a second time terrified every government in the galaxy. Elena studied the detailed reports from the monitoring stations. For 3 centuries, human space had remained sealed, with only automated responses to any attempt at contact. The humans had truly withdrawn from galactic affairs, keeping their promise to leave the other species alone. But they were still watching. Us, Sarah observed, pointing to data streams showing human sensor networks. They built observation posts throughout this entire region of space. They know everything that happens out here. A new hologram appeared. An elderly spheroid leader whose collective voice spoke for billions of individuals within his gestalt consciousness. We call them the Silent Guardians now. They do not interact with us, but their presence shapes every decision we make. No species has attempted large-scale conquest since the Zelthani extinction. No government has tried to manipulate another species' development. The fear of attracting human judgment has brought a peace to the galaxy that the Confederation never achieved. Elena realized the profound irony of the situation. By withdrawing from galactic civilization, humanity had become its most powerful influence. Every species in the region shaped their behavior around the fear of awakening human wrath. "Show me the records of contact attempts," Elena requested. Sarah accessed files showing numerous efforts over the centuries to re-establish communication with humanity. Each attempt had received the same response, a polite but firm message stating that humanity preferred isolation and would appreciate being left alone. The responses are always identical, Marcus noted. Word for word, every time. They're not even bothering to write new rejection letters. Because they meant what they said, Elena realized. They truly want nothing to do with the rest of the galaxy. A new recording appeared. This one from a species Elena didn't recognize. Tall, insectoid beings with iridescent wings. "We are the Cathara, and we were the last to test human resolve," their speaker announced. 200 years ago, we attempted to establish a mining operation in what we believed was empty space on the edge of human territory. Elena leaned forward, interested to hear about the most recent contact with humanity. "The human response was swift and precise," the Cathara continued. "A single ship appeared and politely informed us that we were trespassing. When we explained that our star charts showed the system as unclaimed, they provided us with updated territorial boundaries and asked us to leave within 48 hours. Did you comply?" Elena wondered aloud. "Initially, no," the Cathara admitted. "We had invested significant resources in the mining platform. We requested negotiations for shared use of the system. The human response was educational. The hologram showed detailed sensor readings of what happened next. A small human fleet appeared in the system. Only 12 ships, but their technology was clearly centuries ahead of anything the Cathara possessed. They demonstrated their capabilities by completely disabling our mining platform without causing any casualties," the Cathara explained. "Every system shut down simultaneously. Our ships lost power but maintained life support. Then they towed our entire operation to the edge of the system and left it there." Elena was impressed by the restraint shown. "They could have destroyed the mining platform. That was the message," the Cathara concluded. "They could have done anything they wanted to us, but they chose mercy because we had acted out of ignorance rather than malice. However, they made it clear that a second violation would not be treated so gently." Sarah accessed the most recent monitoring reports. According to these files, human space has been expanding slowly but steadily, not through conquest, but through careful colonization of empty systems. They're building something out there. Elena studied the expansion patterns. Human growth was methodical and defensive, focused on creating buffer zones rather than claiming resources. "They're not building an empire, they're building a fortress." "The question that haunts every species in the galaxy," said another recording, from a recent Andromedan Council session, is what humanity is preparing for. Are they planning for another war? Are they expecting to be attacked again? Or are they simply ensuring that they never again have to interact with species they cannot trust? Elena realized that humanity's isolation had created a different kind of power. The power of mystery. No one knew what humans were capable of now, after 8 centuries of technological development in isolation. The fear of the unknown had become as powerful as the fear of their demonstrated capabilities. "There's something else here," Marcus called out, accessing a restricted section of the archive. Personal testimonies from individuals who encountered humans during the war. These recordings were different, not official government reports, but personal accounts from beings who had actually seen humans in action. Elena listened as survivor after survivor described the same thing. Humans who fought with terrible efficiency, but never showed cruelty for its own sake. "They were the most frightening warriors I ever encountered," said a Vorthon military officer. "Not because they enjoyed violence, but because they treated it as a necessary job to be done properly. They showed no anger during battle, no hatred toward their enemies. They simply eliminated threats with the same calm precision a surgeon might use to remove a tumor." Another survivor, a Confederation administrator who had been captured during the war, added her perspective. "The humans who guarded us were polite, professional, and completely unmoved by any attempt to appeal to their emotions. They had decided that the Zelthani needed to be eliminated, and nothing we could say or do would change that decision. It was like arguing with the laws of physics." Elena felt a chill as she realized what the galaxy had learned about humanity. They weren't feared because they were violent or aggressive, but because they were capable of making moral judgments and then carrying them out with absolute determination, regardless of the cost or consequences. The final entry, Sarah announced, is from just 50 years ago. A message sent jointly by all the major galactic governments. Elena read the message as it appeared on the holographic displays. To the humans of Sol, we have learned from our mistakes. We respect your isolation and your choices. We ask nothing from you except that you remember we exist, and that some of us are trying to build better civilizations than the ones you judged. We hope that someday, when enough time has passed, you might consider us worthy of your respect, if not your friendship. There was no response, Sarah noted quietly. Elena looked around the chamber one final time, absorbing the full weight of what they had discovered. They had found the answer to one of the galaxy's greatest mysteries. Why humanity remained isolated and why no species dared to disturb that isolation. We need to report this to Earth, Elena said finally. Humanity deserves to know their own history. Do you think they'll break their isolation? Marcus asked. Elena considered the question carefully. After 8 centuries of silence after building a civilization based on the principle of being left alone, would humanity choose to rejoin a galaxy that still feared them? I think, she asked.